The sound of shattering glass echoed through the tiny rented room above the general store in Helena, Montana, as Molly Richards dropped the wash basin, her hands trembling so violently she could no longer hold it steady. The realization that had been creeping up on her for weeks had finally crystallized into undeniable truth as she stood there in the dim lamplight of that October evening in 1878, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror and acknowledging what her body had been trying to tell her for 2 months now. She was carrying a child, and the father, a smooth-talking gambler named William Sutton who had swept through town like a summer storm 3 months prior, had vanished without a trace the moment his debts caught up with him. He had left behind nothing but empty promises and a growing secret in Molly's womb that would soon become impossible to hide. At 22 years old, Molly had come to Helena seeking a fresh start after her parents died of fever back in St. Louis. She had worked hard to build a respectable reputation, taking in mending and laundry, helping at the boarding house during busy times, and keeping to herself. Now, all of that would crumble the moment her condition became apparent. She sank onto the narrow bed, pressing her face into her hands, trying to muffle the sobs that threatened to overwhelm her. The next morning dawned cold and crisp, with frost coating the wooden sidewalks of Helena's main street. Molly forced herself to dress and venture out, knowing that hiding away would only make things worse. She wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and made her way to the general store, where Mrs. Patterson had promised her some mending work. The streets were already bustling with activity despite the early hour. Miners heading to their claims, ranchers loading supplies onto wagons, and the usual assortment of townsfolk going about their business. Molly kept her eyes down, clutching her basket close, trying to appear as unremarkable as possible. She was so focused on her own thoughts that she nearly collided with a tall figure emerging from the hardware store. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her before she could stumble backward. "Easy there, miss. Are you all right?" Molly looked up into a pair of warm hazel eyes set in a sun-weathered face. The man was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat. He wore the practical clothing of a working ranch hand, clean but well used, and there was something genuinely concerned in his expression that made Molly's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I am fine, thank you," she managed, stepping back quickly. "I apologize for my clumsiness." "No harm done," he said, touching the brim of his hat politely. "I am Zachary Harrison. I work out at the Double Creek Ranch about 10 miles west of town. I do not believe we have met before." "Molly Richards," she replied softly, aware that several passers-by were watching their exchange with interest. Small-town gossip spread faster than wildfire, and she could not afford to give anyone more reason to talk about her. "I really must be going." She hurried past him before he could say anything else, but she could feel his eyes following her down the street. There had been something different about him, something solid and trustworthy that made her chest ache with longing for things she could never have now. The weeks that followed fell into a painful pattern. Molly continued her work, but she could feel time slipping away like sand through her fingers. Soon her dresses would no longer hide her condition, and then everything would fall apart. She had begun making discreet inquiries about leaving town, perhaps heading further west to California, where no one knew her, where she might pass herself off as a widow. But travel was expensive, and winter was coming on fast in Montana territory. The thought of making such a journey alone in her condition filled her with terror. She saw Zachary Harrison 3 more times over those weeks, always brief encounters on the street or in the general store. Each time he greeted her politely, and each time she noticed the way his eyes lingered on her face with something that might have been interest if her circumstances were different. She learned from Mrs. Patterson's gossip that he had come to Montana 2 years ago from Wyoming, that he was known as an honest, hard-working man who sent money back to his widowed mother in Cheyenne, and that more than one young woman in Helena had set her cap for him without success. Too particular, that one, Mrs. Patterson had sniffed. Plenty of good girls would make him a fine wife, but he is waiting for something, though I cannot imagine what. Molly had kept her head down over her sewing and said nothing, pushing away the bitter thought that even if her situation were different, a man like Zachary Harrison would be far beyond her reach now. It was the first week of November when everything came crashing down. Molly was walking back from the boarding house where she had been helping with the laundry when a wave of dizziness overtook her. She reached out to steady herself against a hitching post, but her vision was already dimming at the edges. She heard someone shout, felt strong arms catch her before she hit the ground, and then everything went black. When she woke, she was lying on a narrow cot in the back room of Dr. Pemberton's office. The elderly physician was standing nearby, talking in low tones with someone else. As her vision cleared, she recognized Zachary Harrison's broad shoulders and dark hair. "She will be fine with rest and proper nutrition," Dr. Pemberton was saying, "but she needs to be careful, especially given her condition. The first months can be precarious." Molly's heart stopped. She tried to sit up, but the movement made her head spin again. Both men turned toward her immediately. "Easy, Miss Richards," Dr. Pemberton said, moving to her side. "You fainted on the street. Mr. Harrison here brought you in." "I am fine," Molly said desperately, trying to swing her legs off the cot despite the way the room tilted dangerously. "I just need to get home." "You need to rest," the doctor said firmly, "and you need to start taking better care of yourself. This is no time to be skipping meals or working yourself to exhaustion." Molly's eyes darted to Zachary, trying to read his expression, trying to determine how much he had heard. His face was carefully neutral, but there was no missing the understanding in his eyes. He knew. Of course he knew. The doctor would have examined her, would have immediately recognized her condition. Shame burned through her like fire. She could not meet his gaze, could not bear to see the judgment or disgust that must be there. Men like Zachary Harrison did not associate with women like her, women who had been foolish enough and weak enough to fall for pretty lies and false promises. "I will give you two a moment," Dr. Pemberton said, clearly misreading the situation. "I need to check on my other patient." The moment the doctor left the room, Molly forced herself to stand, ignoring the way her legs trembled beneath her. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Harrison. I can manage from here. Can you?" His voice was quiet, not accusatory, just genuinely questioning. "Miss Richards, Molly, please. Sit down before you fall down." "I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself," she said, hearing the brittle edge in her own voice. "I do not need your charity or your pity." "I am not offering either," he said, and something in his tone made her finally look at him. His expression was serious, thoughtful, but there was no condemnation in it. "But I would like to talk to you if you will hear me out." "There is nothing to talk about," Molly said, wrapping her arms around herself. "You know my situation now. You know what I am. Please, just let me go so I can figure out what I am going to do." Zachary was silent for a long moment, studying her with those steady hazel eyes. Then he said something she never could have expected. "The father, he is not in the picture," Molly laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "The father left town the moment his gambling debts caught up with him. I was a fool, Mr. Harrison. I believed his pretty words and his promises, and now I am paying the price. Are you satisfied? Is there anything else you would like to know before you spread the news around town?" "I am not going to tell anyone anything," Zachary said firmly. "And you are not a fool, Molly. You are a woman who was lied to by a man who did not deserve your trust. That makes him the villain, not you." His words were so unexpected, so contrary to everything she had been telling herself for weeks, that Molly felt tears spring to her eyes. She turned away quickly, not wanting him to see her cry. "It does not matter who is to blame. The result is the same. I am ruined, and my child will be born without a name or a father. I need to leave Helena before people find out, before I am run out of town or worse. Or you could stay," Zachary said quietly. Molly turned back to stare at him. "What? You could stay in Helena? Raise your child here, where you have started to build a life?" He took a deep breath, and she saw him square his shoulders as if bracing for something difficult. "You could stay if you had a husband to give the child a name." For a moment, Molly could not process what he was saying. Then understanding crashed over her, and she shook her head violently. "No, absolutely not. I will not trap you into some kind of arrangement out of misplaced nobility." "You would not be trapping me," Zachary said. "I am offering freely." "Molly, I know we barely know each other, but I have noticed you since the first time I saw you in town. You carry yourself with dignity and strength, and I have heard nothing but good things about your character and your work. The situation you find yourself in does not change any of that." "You do not understand what you are suggesting," Molly said, her voice shaking. "The scandal, the gossip, people would know the child is not yours. So we tell them we married quietly a few months back, before we announced it publicly. We say we wanted to be sure of things before making it known. People will gossip no matter what we do, but eventually they will move on to fresher scandals. They always do." "Why?" Molly whispered. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Zachary moved closer, his expression earnest. "Because I know what it is like to need help and not have it. My father died when I was 15, left my mother with 3 children and a failing ranch. People in our town looked the other way, did not want to get involved with our troubles. We lost everything and had to start over with nothing. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone who needed it, I would not turn away." He paused, then added more softly, "And you are not a stranger, Molly. Not really. I have been looking for a reason to talk to you properly for weeks now. This is not how I imagined it happening, but maybe fate has a sense of humor." Molly stared at him, trying to find the trap, the angle, the reason behind such an incredible offer. But all she saw was sincerity in his face and something else, something that might have been hope. "You are serious." "Completely serious. Marry me, Molly. Let me give your child a name and a father. We can figure out the rest as we go." "I have nothing to offer you," she said desperately. "No dowry, no connections, nothing but scandal and a child that is not yours." "You would be offering me a chance at a family, at a life with someone I think I could care about very much if you gave me the opportunity to try." Zachary reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused from hard work, solid and real. "I am not asking you to love me, Molly. I am asking you to let me help you, and maybe, if we are lucky, we can build something good together. But even if it stays as nothing more than a practical arrangement, your child will have a father and a name, and you will have protection and security." Molly felt tears streaming down her face now, unable to stop them. No one had offered her kindness without strings attached since she had lost her parents. The temptation to accept, to grasp this lifeline he was extending, was almost overwhelming. But she had to be sure he understood what he was taking on. "If I accept this, people will talk," she said. "They will count on their fingers when the baby comes early. They will whisper about both of us. Let them whisper. I have weathered worse than gossip." And the child, when he or she grows up, what will we tell them? The truth, when they are old enough to understand it. That I chose to be their father, that I wanted them, even before they were born. That family is not just about blood, it is about choice and commitment and love. Molly searched his face, looking for any hint of hesitation or doubt, but found none. He meant every word. This stranger, this good man, was offering her salvation with no guarantee of anything in return, except the chance to build something together. "If I say yes," she whispered, "I will do everything I can to be a good wife to you, Zachary. I will work hard and keep a good home and never give you cause to regret this decision. I promise you that." A slow smile spread across Zachary's face, transforming it from handsome to something warmer and more open. "Then say yes, Molly Richards. Say yes and let me be the father your child needs." She took a shaky breath, feeling as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown waters. But sometimes, she realized, you had to take a leap of faith. Sometimes you had to trust that there were still good people in the world. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I will marry you." The wedding took place 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church with only Dr. Pemberton and his wife as witnesses. Molly wore her best dress, a modest blue calico that she had carefully let out at the waist, and Zachary wore his Sunday suit, which was clean and well-maintained if a bit worn at the cuffs. Reverend Walsh performed the ceremony with a knowing look in his eyes that made Molly want to sink through the floor, but he said nothing judgmental, merely pronounced them man and wife with the same solemnity he would have given any couple. When Zachary kissed her at the end of the ceremony, it was chaste and brief, his lips barely brushing hers, but Molly felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or desperation. His hand was steady on her back as they signed the marriage register, and when he introduced her to Dr. Pemberton afterward as his wife, there was pride in his voice that made her throat tighten. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, where Zachary had been staying when he came to town. He had arranged for the nicest room available, which was not saying much, but he had also bought wildflowers from one of the local children and placed them in a jar on the small table, a gesture so thoughtful that Molly felt tears prick her eyes yet again. "I know this is not the wedding night you might have dreamed of," Zachary said once they were alone in the room, standing awkwardly on opposite sides of the narrow bed. "I do not expect anything from you, Molly. We can take our time getting to know each other." "You are my husband now," Molly said quietly. "You have rights." "Rights," Zachary repeated, and there was something almost sad in his voice. "Is that what you think this is about? Molly, I married you to help you, not to claim some kind of ownership over you. We share this bed because we are married, and it would look strange if we did not, but that is all that has to happen here. We sleep, we rest, and in the morning we start figuring out our life together. Does that sound acceptable to you?" Molly stared at him, once again thrown off balance by his unexpected decency. Every man she had ever known would have taken advantage of the situation, would have claimed their marital rights regardless of how she felt about it. But Zachary was looking at her with nothing but patience and respect in his eyes. "That sounds more than acceptable," she managed. "That sounds like the action of a genuinely good man." "I am just trying to do the right thing," Zachary said, but his ears turned slightly red at the compliment. "Now you take the bed, I will take the floor." "Zachary, no. This is ridiculous. The bed is big enough for both of us, and I will not have my husband sleeping on the floor on our wedding night. People will talk if they find out." They compromised by both sleeping on top of the covers, fully dressed, with a respectful distance between them. But sometime in the night, Molly woke to find herself curled against Zachary's side, his arm loosely around her shoulders, and for the first time in months, she felt safe. In the morning, they made their way to the Double Creek Ranch where Zachary worked. He had already spoken with his employer, Frank Carter, about bringing a wife to the ranch, and Carter had agreed to let them use one of the small cabins on the property that had been sitting empty since the previous occupant had moved on. The cabin was tiny, just one room with a small loft above, but it was solidly built and had a good fireplace. Molly looked around at the dusty floor, the cobwebs in the corners, the general air of neglect, and felt something shift inside her. This was hers, theirs. A home, small and humble as it might be. It needs work, Zachary said apologetically, but it is sound. I will make repairs and improvements as I can. We will make it comfortable. It is perfect, Molly said and meant it. Compared to the uncertain future she had been facing just days ago, this little cabin felt like a palace. They spent the next week settling in. Zachary continued his work on the ranch, but every spare moment was devoted to improving the cabin. He repaired the roof where it leaked, replaced cracked window panes, built shelves and a proper bed frame. Molly scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, made curtains from fabric she had been saving, and slowly transformed the bare space into something that felt like home. The other ranch hands were curious about the new bride, especially given how suddenly she had appeared, but Zachary had spread the story they had agreed upon about a quiet marriage a few months back, and most people seemed to accept it at face value. Or if they did not, they at least pretended to for propriety's sake. The exception was Frank Carter's wife, Elizabeth, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who came to visit one afternoon while Zachary was out working. Molly invited her in nervously, offering tea that she could barely afford, trying to make a good impression. Elizabeth accepted the tea and looked around the cabin with assessing eyes before finally settling her gaze on Molly. "How far along are you, dear?" Molly nearly dropped her cup. "I beg your pardon. I have birthed 5 children and helped deliver a dozen more. I recognize the signs. You are carrying, probably about 3 months if I am any judge." And unless Zachary Harrison was conducting a very secret courtship that no one in town knew about, including my husband who he talks to nearly every day, that child was not conceived in wedlock. Molly felt the blood drain from her face. She set down her teacup with shaking hands, trying to think of what to say, how to salvage this situation before Elizabeth spread the truth all over the county. "Please," she whispered. "Please, I know how it looks, but Zachary is a good man. He is trying to help me. Do not ruin him because of my mistakes." Elizabeth's stern expression softened slightly. "Child, I am not here to ruin anyone. I am here to make sure you know what you are doing and that you are taking care of yourself and that baby. Does Zachary know?" "Yes, he knows everything. The father was a gambler who left town before I even knew I was expecting. Zachary offered to marry me and give the child a name. He asked nothing in return except the chance to build a life together. And you believe he meant it. You believe this is not just some scheme to get a wife without having to go through proper courtship. I believe he is the most honorable man I have ever met," Molly said firmly. "I do not deserve his help, but I am grateful for it every single day." Elizabeth studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Then here is what is going to happen. You are going to come to dinner at our house twice a week, where I will make sure you are eating properly. You are also going to let me teach you what you need to know about birthing and caring for a baby, because I assume your mother is not around to do it. And if you need anything at all, you are going to tell me or Frank, and we will see that you get it. Understood?" Molly felt tears spring to her eyes for what felt like the 100th time since this whole ordeal began. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because Zachary Harrison is one of the best men I have ever known, And if he saw something worth fighting for in you, then I am inclined to trust his judgment. Also, because no woman should have to face childbirth without support, regardless of the circumstances that led to the pregnancy. Elizabeth reached across the table and patted Molly's hand. We all make mistakes, dear. What matters is what we do after. You have clearly chosen to do the honorable thing, and Zachary has shown remarkable character in helping you. The least I can do is make sure you both have the support you need. From that day forward, Elizabeth became Molly's fierce protector and friend. She taught her about pregnancy and childbirth with frank honesty that sometimes made Molly blush, but always left her feeling more prepared. She shared vegetables from her garden, hand-me-down baby clothes from her own children, and most importantly, companionship during the long days when Zachary was out working the ranch. As November turned into December and winter settled over Montana in earnest, Molly and Zachary slowly began to grow more comfortable with each other. They established routines, shared meals, talked in the evenings by firelight about their lives before they met. Molly learned that Zachary loved horses and had dreams of someday having his own ranch, breeding and training quality stock. Zachary learned that Molly could read and write far better than average, that she had a gift for numbers, and that she loved poetry, though she had not had access to any books since leaving St. Louis. For Christmas, Zachary surprised her with a small volume of poetry that he had saved up for and ordered from the general store. Molly cried when she opened it, then read to him by the firelight on Christmas Eve, her voice soft and steady as she shared verses about love and hope and new beginnings. "Your voice is beautiful," Zachary said when she finished. "I could listen to you read all night." "Then I shall read to you whenever you like," Molly replied, and when their eyes met across the firelight, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest that had nothing to do with the flames. That night, lying in bed with Zachary's steady breathing beside her, Molly realized with a start that she was happy. Despite everything that had happened, despite the fear and uncertainty that still lurked at the edges of her mind when she thought about the coming birth, she was genuinely happy in this little cabin with this unexpected man who had offered her everything and asked for nothing in return. January brought deep snow and bitter cold that kept Zachary close to the ranch buildings, tending to animals and doing repairs that could be done indoors. Molly's pregnancy was becoming more apparent now, her belly swelling unmistakably beneath her dresses. When they went to town for supplies, she saw the way people looked at them, saw the women counting on their fingers, saw the judgment in some eyes and speculation in others. But she also saw the way Zachary stood beside her, steady and proud, his hand on her back in a gesture of support and protection. She saw how he did not flinch from the gossip or the stares, how he introduced her as his wife with warmth in his voice, how he glared down anyone who dared to say something rude within his hearing. "Does it bother you?" she asked him one evening as they sat by the fire, her hands busy with knitting tiny garments for the baby. "The gossip, the way people look at us." "No," Zachary said simply. "Let them look. Let them gossip. They do not know the truth of things, and their opinions do not matter to me. What matters is that you and the baby are healthy and that we are building a life together. Everything else is just noise." "How did you become so wise?" Molly asked, smiling despite herself. "I am not wise," Zachary replied. "I just learned early that you cannot control what other people think or say. You can only control your own actions and try to live with integrity. If you do that, eventually people either come around or they do not, but at least you can sleep at night knowing you did right." Molly set down her knitting and looked at him seriously. "Zachary, I need you to know something. When I agreed to marry you, I thought I was entering into a practical arrangement, nothing more. I was grateful for your help, but I did not expect to feel anything beyond that. But these past months, getting to know you, building this life together, I have realized something. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. I care about you, truly care about you, and I think, given time, I could love you very much. Zachary went very still, his eyes fixed on her face. Molly. You do not have to say anything, she rushed on. I know this was not what you signed up for. I just wanted you to know that this is not just obligation for me anymore. You have become important to me, more important than I ever imagined possible. Can I tell you something? Zachary asked quietly. When she nodded, he continued. That first day I saw you on the street, before we even spoke, I watched you walk past the saloon. There were men standing outside making crude comments to women passing by, but when you approached, you held your head high and looked them straight in the eye with such dignity that they actually fell silent. You did not cower or hurry past. You just walked by like you had every right to be there unmolested, and something about that made my heart skip a beat. I have been half in love with you since that moment, Molly. Marrying you was not just about helping you, though that was certainly part of it. It was also about taking a chance on something I thought I might never have, a chance to be with someone I genuinely admired and wanted to know better. Molly felt her breath catch in her throat. You have never said anything. I did not want to pressure you or make you feel obligated to return feelings you might not have. I was willing to wait, to give you time to heal and to see if anything might grow between us naturally. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. But if you are telling me that you feel something too, then I want you to know that I am all in, Molly, not just as your husband in name but in truth. I want to build a real marriage with you, a real family, if you will have me. Yes, Molly whispered. Yes, Zachary, I will have you. I want that too, more than anything. When he kissed her this time, it was nothing like the chaste brush of lips at their wedding. This kiss was deep and searching, full of promise and longing and the beginning of real love. Molly leaned into him, feeling the last walls around her heart crumble away. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, not as strangers bound by obligation, but as partners choosing each other every day. February brought a brief thaw followed by more snow, and Molly grew large and uncomfortable, her back aching constantly, and her sleep interrupted by the baby's movements, and her own need to constantly relieve herself. But she also felt strangely content, watching Zachary build a cradle in the evenings, feeling his hand on her belly to feel the baby kick, planning for the future they would share. It was mid-March when the first real labor pains started. Molly had been feeling strange all day, restless and unable to settle, but she had attributed it to the general discomfort of late pregnancy. But when the first strong contraction hit in the early evening, there was no mistaking what was happening. Zachary, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. I think it is time. To his credit, Zachary did not panic. He got her settled on the bed, then ran to get Elizabeth Carter. By the time he returned with Elizabeth and 2 other women from neighboring ranches, Molly's contractions were coming hard and fast, and she was beginning to be frightened by the intensity of the pain. You are doing fine, dear, Elizabeth said, examining her with practiced efficiency. Your first baby always takes the longest, but you are progressing well. Just breathe through the contractions and save your strength for when it is time to push. Zachary hovered anxiously by the door until Elizabeth finally took pity on him. You can stay if you want, but you have to promise not to faint or get in the way. I am not going anywhere, Zachary said firmly, coming to stand by Molly's head. He took her hand and let her squeeze it with all her strength as another contraction tore through her. I am right here, Molly. You are not alone. The labor went on for hours, through the night and into the early morning. Molly lost track of time, lost track of everything except the pain and Zachary's steady presence beside her, his voice murmuring encouragement, his hand never leaving hers. When Elizabeth finally said it was time to push, Molly was exhausted and terrified, certain she did not have the strength left to do what needed to be done. "Yes, you do," Zachary said fiercely, as if reading her thoughts. "You are the strongest person I know, Molly. You can do this. Just a little more and our baby will be here. Our baby. Not your baby, but our baby." The words gave Molly the last bit of strength she needed. She bore down with everything she had, and after what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few more minutes, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's indignant cry. "A boy," Elizabeth announced, wrapping the squalling infant in a clean cloth and placing him on Molly's chest. "A healthy, angry little boy. Congratulations." Molly stared down at the tiny, red-faced creature in her arms, overwhelmed by a rush of love so intense it almost hurt. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, with a thick shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air as he cried. She looked up at Zachary through her tears and saw that he was crying too, looking at the baby with wonder and joy. "He is beautiful," Zachary whispered. "Molly, he is just perfect." "Would you like to hold your son?" Molly asked and watched as Zachary's face crumpled with emotion. "My son," he repeated as if testing the words. Then, more firmly, "Yes. Yes, I would very much like to hold my son." Elizabeth showed him how to support the baby's head, and Molly watched as Zachary cradled the tiny infant against his chest with surprising confidence. The baby stopped crying almost immediately, seeming to sense the steady strength of the man holding him. "Hello, little one," Zachary murmured. "Welcome to the world. I am your papa, and I am going to love you and protect you for the rest of my life. That is a promise." They named him Samuel James Harrison, Samuel after Zachary's father and James after Molly's. When they took him to town for the first time a few weeks later, they held their heads high against the whispers and the stares. Let people count on their fingers if they wanted. Samuel had a father who loved him, a mother who adored him, and that was all that mattered. The spring and summer of 1879 passed in a blur of sleepless nights and simple joys. Molly marveled at how naturally Zachary took to fatherhood, how he would walk the floor with Samuel when the baby was fussy, how he sang silly songs to make him smile, how he looked at their son with such fierce love and pride that it made Molly's heart swell. She also marveled at how her own feelings for Zachary continued to deepen and grow. There was nothing in the world more attractive than watching him with Samuel, seeing his gentleness and patience, his willingness to help with even the most unpleasant tasks of caring for an infant without complaint. At night, when Samuel finally slept and they had a few moments to themselves, they would lie together in the darkness and talk about their dreams for the future, about the family they were building together. "I have saved almost enough," Zachary told her one night in late summer. "Another year, maybe two, and I will have enough to make a down payment on our own place. Not a big ranch, not at first, but enough land to start breeding horses like I have always wanted. Would you like that, Molly? A place of our own?" "I would love that," Molly replied, snuggling closer to him. "But Zachary, I am already happy. Right here in this little cabin with you and Samuel. Anything more than this is just a bonus." "You deserve more," Zachary said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You deserve everything good in the world, and I am going to do my best to give it to you." In September, when Samuel was 6 months old and sitting up on his own, Molly realized she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear or shame, only joy and excitement. When she told Zachary, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure happiness. "Another baby," he said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Molly, are you as happy about this as I am?" "Happier," she assured him. "This time, I get to carry a child knowing that their father will be there every step of the way, that they will be born into a family full of love. How could I be anything but thrilled?" Their second child, a daughter they named Grace Marie, was born in May of 1880. The birth was easier than Samuel's had been, and this time there was no shadow of shame or scandal, only the pure celebration of a new life joining their family. Zachary held her while she nursed and cried openly at the sight of his daughter. "I never imagined I could be this happy," he told Molly as they lay together with Grace sleeping between them and Samuel tucked in his cradle nearby. "I spent so much of my life just trying to survive, trying to help my family survive, that I never let myself dream about having a family of my own. And now look at us. 2 beautiful children and a wife I love more than I ever thought possible to love anyone. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Molly replied. "I found you when I needed you most, and you gave me a second chance at life." "I will never stop being grateful for that, Zachary. Never." By the time Grace was a year old, Zachary had saved enough to make his dream a reality. Frank Carter helped him find a property about 20 miles south of the Double Creek, 160 acres with good grazing land, a small creek running through it, and a half-finished house that the previous owner had abandoned when he decided Montana winters were too harsh for him. They moved in the spring of 1882, with Samuel toddling around excitedly exploring every corner and Grace babbling happily from her mother's arms. The house needed work, but it was spacious compared to the little cabin, with a real bedroom and a kitchen and a front porch where Molly could sit and watch the sunset over the mountains. Zachary threw himself into building the ranch with the same determination he had brought to everything else in his life. He started with 4 good mares and a quality stallion, carefully selected for temperament and conformation. He worked dawn to dusk building fences, repairing outbuildings, breaking horses to saddle, and slowly building a reputation as a man who bred and trained honest, reliable horses. Molly worked just as hard, keeping the house, tending a large garden, caring for the children, and helping with the ranch work whenever she could. She kept the books for their small operation, her facility with numbers proving invaluable as they tracked expenses and income. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, she would read to Zachary from the growing collection of books they were accumulating, or they would sit together on the porch and watch the stars come out over their land. "You ever think about him?" Zachary asked her one night. "Samuel's biological father, I mean." Molly was quiet for a moment, considering the question honestly. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Usually when I look at Samuel and see some expression or gesture that must come from that side of his blood. But not with any longing or regret, if that is what you are asking. That man was a liar and a coward who abandoned his responsibility. You are Samuel's father in every way that matters. You are the one who walked the floor with him at night, who taught him to ride, who is teaching him right from wrong. Blood does not make a father, Zachary. Choice and commitment and love make a father, and you have given Samuel all of those things in abundance." "Does Samuel know," Zachary asked, "that I am not his biological father? Not yet. He is still too young to understand. But when he is older, when he can really comprehend what it means, we will tell him the truth. We will tell him that you chose to be his father before he was even born, that you loved him from the moment you first held him. We will make sure he knows that he was never unwanted, never a burden, but always a blessing to both of us." Zachary took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I am glad we are in agreement. I never want him to feel like there are secrets being kept from him, but I also want him to understand the full story, not just the parts that might make him feel unwanted. You are a wonderful father, Molly said, leaning her head on his shoulder. To both of our children, they are so lucky to have you. I am the lucky one, Zachary replied. I got to have a family with the woman I love. Not many men can say that. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Zachary's reputation grew, and buyers came from as far away as Wyoming and Idaho to purchase his horses. They added cattle to the operation, just a small herd at first but growing steadily. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and Molly hired a young woman from town to help with the house and the children. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the ranch and idolized his father, following Zachary around and trying to help with every task. Grace was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a stubborn streak that reminded Molly of herself. In 1884, they welcomed another son, whom they named Thomas William, and in 1887, a second daughter, Catherine Rose, completed their family. The house that had seemed so spacious when they first moved in became crowded and noisy, full of laughter and the chaos that came with 4 active children. They added on a room, then another, until the original structure was barely recognizable. But through it all, the love that had brought Molly and Zachary together remained the foundation of everything they built. It was Samuel's 10th birthday when they finally told him the truth about his conception. He had started asking questions, wondering why he had been born so soon after his parents' wedding, picking up on comments from other children whose parents had been less discreet than they should have been. Molly and Zachary sat him down in the parlor after the younger children had gone to bed and told him everything, gently but honestly. Samuel listened in silence, his young face serious. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment, processing what he had been told. Finally, he looked up at Zachary. "So you are not my real father?" he asked, his voice small. "I am your real father in every way that counts," Zachary said firmly. "I chose to be your father before you were born. I was there when you took your first breath. I have loved you and raised you and been proud of you every single day of your life. What I am not is your biological father, but that does not make me any less real or any less yours. Do you understand the difference?" Samuel thought about this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I think so. You are the father who wanted me, not the father who left." "Exactly," Molly said, her voice thick with emotion. "The man who contributed to your conception was not worthy of being called a father. Your papa, the man sitting here with us, he is the one who earned that title through his actions and his love." "Does this mean I am not really a Harrison?" Samuel asked, a note of worry creeping into his voice. "You are absolutely a Harrison," Zachary said. "You carry my name. You will inherit this ranch along with your siblings, and you are my son in every legal and moral sense. Nothing about what we have told you tonight changes that. We just wanted you to know the truth, so that if anyone ever says anything cruel or tries to use this information against you, you will already know and you will understand that it does not diminish who you are or how much you are loved." Samuel was quiet again, then asked, "Do Grace and Thomas and Catherine know?" "Not yet," Molly said. "They are still too young, but when they are old enough to understand, we will tell them too. We do not believe in keeping secrets from you children." "But Samuel, this is your story to share or not share as you choose. If you want to tell your siblings now, you can. If you want to keep it private for a while longer, that is fine too. It is your decision." "I need to think about it," Samuel said finally. "Can I go to bed now? I just need to think." "Of course," Zachary said. "But Samuel, before you go, I need you to know something. You are my son. You will always be my son. Nothing you have learned tonight changes how much I love you or how proud I am of the young man you are becoming. Do you believe that?" Samuel looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, Papa, I believe you." In the days that followed, Samuel was quieter than usual, clearly working through what he had learned. But slowly, he seemed to come to terms with it. He asked a few more questions, wanting to know more about the man who had contributed to his conception. But when Molly told him honestly that she knew very little about William Sutton beyond his name and his profession, Samuel seemed satisfied. "I do not need to know more about him," he said finally. "Papa is my father. That is all that matters." The revelation seemed to only strengthen the bond between Samuel and Zachary. If anything, Samuel became even more devoted to his father, perhaps recognizing at some level the incredible gift Zachary had given him by choosing to be his father when he had no obligation to do so. As Samuel moved into his teenage years, he became Zachary's right hand on the ranch, showing a natural talent for working with horses that made his father beam with pride. Grace grew into a thoughtful, intelligent young woman who loved reading as much as her mother, and often talked about becoming a teacher. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into scrapes and keeping Molly and Zachary on their toes, while Catherine was the peacemaker, the one who could smooth over any conflict with her sweet nature and gentle words. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Molly with a trip to Helena, just the two of them leaving the children in the capable hands of their hired help and Elizabeth Carter, who had remained a close friend over the years. They checked into the hotel where they had spent their wedding night, though this time they could afford the nicest room in the establishment. 15 years, Molly said as they sat together by the window, looking out over the town that had grown considerably since they first met. "Can you believe it has been that long? Sometimes it feels like forever, and sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I caught you on the street to keep you from falling," Zachary replied. "But every single one of those years has been a gift, Molly. Even the hard ones, the years when money was tight or the weather was bad or the children were sick. All of it has been worth it because I got to go through it with you." "I love you," Molly said, turning to face him. "I do not say it enough, but I do. You saved my life, Zachary, and then you gave me a life worth living. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose, and most importantly, you gave me love. Real love, the kind I never even knew existed before I met you." "You gave me all of those things too," Zachary said, pulling her close. "I was just existing before I met you, Molly, just going through the motions of life without any real joy or purpose beyond survival. You changed everything. You and the children, you made me believe in happiness, in the future, in the possibility of good things. I am the one who was saved, not you." They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of a couple who had grown together through years of shared joys and struggles. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Molly felt a deep sense of contentment and gratitude for the life they had built together, for the man who had looked past scandal and shame to see the woman beneath, who had offered his name and his heart with no guarantee of anything in return. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. Samuel turned 18 and took on more responsibility on the ranch, proving himself to be a natural horseman and a shrewd businessman. Grace got her teaching certificate and opened a small school on their property for the children of neighboring ranches. Thomas, to everyone's surprise, developed a talent for blacksmithing and set up a forge to make and repair tools for the ranch and their neighbors. Catherine, still just 15, was beginning to attract the attention of young men in the area, much to Zachary's consternation. "She is still a baby," he grumbled one evening after turning away yet another prospective suitor. She is the same age I was when I got pregnant with Samuel, Molly reminded him gently. And while I do not want her to make the same mistakes I did, we cannot keep her locked away forever, Zachary. She needs to learn to navigate the world, including dealing with young men. I know, Zachary sighed. But it was easier when all I had to worry about was teaching them to ride and do their chores. This growing up business is hard on a father's heart. Molly laughed and kissed his cheek. You are a wonderful father, even when you are being overprotective. Catherine will be fine. We have raised her well, taught her to be smart and cautious and to value herself. She will make good choices. And Catherine did make good choices, eventually marrying a young veterinarian who set up practice in Helena and clearly adored her. Grace married a few years later, choosing a fellow teacher who shared her passion for education. Thomas found a wife among the daughters of a neighboring rancher, a practical, cheerful woman who could handle his wild energy. And Samuel, to everyone's delight, married a young woman he met at a horse auction in Wyoming, a rancher's daughter who shared his love of horses and who fit into the Harrison family as if she had always been there. Grandchildren followed, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter all over again. Molly and Zachary aged gracefully, their hair turning silver, their faces weathering like the Montana landscape they loved, but their love for each other never diminishing. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, growing richer and more complex, like a fine wine improving with age. It was on their 30th anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, that Samuel stood up to make a toast. He was 30 years old now, with 2 children of his own and another on the way, a successful partner in the ranch operation, and the image of his father in the way he carried himself and treated others. I want to say something to my parents, Samuel began, his voice carrying across the crowded dining room. 30 years ago today, they made a commitment to each other that changed all of our lives. Most of you know the story of how they met, how they married under circumstances that were not ideal, how they built this ranch and this family from almost nothing. But what some of you might not know is that I am not my father's biological son. There was a ripple of surprise through the room, though not from Grace, Thomas, and Catherine, who had all learned the truth years ago. Molly felt Zachary tense beside her, but Samuel continued. My mother was in an impossible situation when she met my father. She was alone, pregnant, and facing a future of scandal and hardship. My biological father was a coward who ran away from his responsibilities. But my papa, Zachary Harrison, he stepped up and said I will be his father. He gave me his name, his love, and his guidance, even though he had no obligation to do so. He chose me before I was even born, and he has been the best father a man could ask for every day since. Samuel's voice was thick with emotion now, and Molly saw tears on the faces of many in the room. Papa taught me what it means to be a man of integrity, to keep your word, to treat others with respect, to work hard and take pride in what you build. He taught me what real fatherhood looks like, not the accidental contribution of biology, but the daily choice to love and support and guide. Everything good in me, I owe to him and to Mama. So I want to raise a glass to the two of them, to 30 years of marriage, to the family they built, and to the example of real love and commitment they have shown us all. To Mama and Papa. To Mama and Papa, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Molly looked at Zachary and saw tears streaming down his weathered face. She took his hand and squeezed it tight, her own tears falling freely. 30 years ago, she had been a desperate woman with no hope and no future, and he had been a stranger with an impossible offer. Now they were surrounded by children and grandchildren, sitting in a home they had built together on land they owned, celebrating 3 decades of a love that had started as an act of kindness and grown into something extraordinary. "Thank you," she whispered to Zachary, "for everything. For saying yes when you could have walked away. For building this life with me. For loving me and Samuel and all of our children with such devotion. Thank you for being exactly the man I needed, even when I did not know I needed you." "Thank you for taking a chance on me," Zachary replied, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "For giving me a family to love and a reason to build something lasting. For loving me back even when you had every reason not to. You made me the happiest man alive, Molly Harrison, and I would do it all over again in a heartbeat." They kissed then, to the cheers and applause of their family, and Molly felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt at 17, being kissed for the first time by this good man who had saved her life in every way that mattered. The years that followed brought the inevitable challenges that come with aging. Zachary's knees began to trouble him from decades of ranch work, and Molly's eyesight weakened, though she refused to give up her beloved reading, just holding books closer and closer to her face until Grace finally convinced her to get spectacles. They gradually turned over more of the ranch operation to Samuel and Thomas, spending their days on the porch watching their grandchildren play and occasionally offering advice when asked. On a warm summer evening in 1910, 32 years after that fateful day when Molly realized she was pregnant and her world seemed to be ending, she and Zachary sat together on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. They were both in their 60s now, worn by time and hard work, but still holding hands like newlyweds. "You ever wonder how different your life would have been if I had not fainted that day?" Molly asked. "If Dr. Pemberton had not told you I was pregnant, if you had not made that incredible offer." Zachary was quiet for a moment, considering. "I suppose I would have eventually found someone else to marry, maybe had a family of my own. But it would not have been this family, and she would not have been you. I cannot imagine my life without you, Molly, without Samuel and Grace and Thomas and Catherine, without all the grandchildren running around here making noise and mischief. This is the life I was supposed to have, I know that in my bones, and I would not change a single thing, not one moment, even the hard ones." "Not even the scandal?" Molly asked. "People talked about us for years, you know they did." "Let them talk," Zachary said with a shrug. "They can say whatever they want. I know the truth. I know that we built something real and good and lasting. I know that our children are happy and healthy and good people. I know that I have been privileged to spend the last 32 years with the woman I love. What do I care what busybodies whispered about us decades ago? You are a remarkable man, Zachary Harrison," Molly said. "The most remarkable man I have ever known." "And you are the love of my life, Molly Harrison," Zachary replied. "The beginning and end of my happiness. Everything good in my life started the day I caught you on that street in Helena." As the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Molly leaned her head on Zachary's shoulder and felt profoundly grateful for the twists of fate that had brought them together. She had been certain, that terrible night when she realized she was pregnant and alone, that her life was over, that she had ruined everything through her own foolishness and naivety. But instead, her life had been just beginning. Because a good man with a generous heart had looked past scandal and shame to see a woman worth saving, worth building a life with. Because he had offered his name and his protection and asked nothing in return except the chance to love her. Because he had kept his promise to be a father to Samuel and had loved him and all their other children with the kind of devotion that made biology irrelevant. She thought about all the years they had shared, the struggles and triumphs, the quiet moments and the celebrations. The way their love had deepened and matured like a tree sending roots deep into fertile soil. She thought about the family they had created, the legacy they would leave behind in their children and grandchildren, and the ranch they had built from nothing. "I love you," she said softly, "more than I could ever put into words. You are my heart, Zachary. You always have been." "And you are mine," he replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Until the day I die and beyond, Molly, I will love you beyond." They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other when they most needed to be found, who had built something beautiful and lasting from unpromising beginnings. Around them, the ranch they had created bustled with life and activity, their children and grandchildren going about their evening routines, the sounds of family carrying on the warm summer air. Inside the house, Molly could hear one of her grandchildren practicing piano, the notes floating out through the open windows. Another child was laughing at something, the sound bright and pure. Samuel was discussing breeding plans with his younger brothers, their voices a low rumble from the dining room. The hired men were finishing up the evening chores in the barn, their voices raised in a work song that Zachary had taught them years ago. This was home. This was family. This was the life that had seemed impossible that terrible night 32 years ago when Molly had stood alone in a rented room and realized her world was falling apart. But it had not fallen apart. It had been rebuilt, brick by brick, moment by moment, by a man who had seen her not as ruined or shamed, but as someone worth fighting for. "Thank you," she whispered again, though she had said it 1,000 times over the years. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for valuing me when I thought I was worthless, for loving me when I was certain I was unlovable. Thank you for Samuel and Grace and Thomas and Catherine, for this ranch, for this life. Thank you for everything, Zachary." "The pleasure has been all mine," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Every single day with you has been a gift, Molly, every single one." As night fell completely over the Montana ranch, Molly and Zachary remained on the porch, holding hands and watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast western sky. They had weathered storms together, literal and metaphorical. They had built a home and a family from nothing but determination and love. They had proven that families were made not just by blood but by choice, by commitment, by showing up day after day and choosing each other over and over again. The story that had begun with fear and desperation had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the power of kindness and the strength of real love. A cowboy had said, "I will be his father," to a desperate woman carrying another man's child. And in doing so, he had created not just a family but a legacy of love that would ripple through generations. Inside the house, Catherine called out that dessert was ready, her voice bright with happiness. The grandchildren cheered, and there was the sound of chairs scraping and feet running. Samuel appeared at the door, grinning at his parents. "Are you two coming in? Mama made your favorite pie, and if you do not hurry, Thomas will eat your share." Zachary laughed and stood, offering his hand to Molly. She took it and let him help her to her feet, marveling as she always did at the simple joy of being touched with such affection by this man who had chosen her when he had no reason to do so. They walked into the warm, bright house together, surrounded by the noise and chaos and love of their large family. As Molly took her seat at the head of the long table they had built when the family got too big for the original dining set, she looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at Zachary sitting beside her with his hand resting on hers, and felt her heart swell with gratitude and joy. This was what love looked like. Not the passionate intensity of new romance, though they had had that too in their time. Not the desperate clinging of people afraid to be alone, though there had been elements of that at the beginning. But the deep, abiding, comfortable love of two people who had chosen each other every day for over 3 decades. The love that weathered storms and celebrated triumphs and kept showing up, kept choosing, kept building, no matter what obstacles arose. To family, Samuel said, raising his glass of cider. To the past, the present, and the future. To the love that binds us together and the legacy we are building for those who come after us. To family, everyone echoed, and Molly raised her glass along with them, her eyes meeting Zachary's across the table and seeing her own joy and contentment reflected back at her. The meal was lively and loud, full of laughter and stories and good-natured teasing. The grandchildren were shooed off to bed eventually, though not without protests and demands for stories. The adult children lingered over coffee, talking about their lives and their plans, seeking advice from their parents, and simply enjoying being together. When everyone had finally gone home or gone to bed, and the house was quiet again, Molly and Zachary climbed the stairs to their bedroom. The room that had once seemed so large now felt cozy and familiar, filled with the accumulation of decades of shared life. Molly sat at her dressing table, removing her pins and brushing out her silver hair, watching Zachary in the mirror as he undressed for bed. He had aged well, she thought. His hair was completely silver now, his face deeply lined, his body showing the wear of decades of hard physical labor. But to her, he was still the handsome young cowboy who had caught her on the street in Helena and offered her salvation with nothing but kindness in his eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, catching her eye in the mirror. "About how lucky I am," Molly replied honestly. "About how easily things could have gone so differently. About how grateful I am that you were the one who caught me that day, that you were the one who said I will be his father and changed everything." Zachary came to stand behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "I was the lucky one. I got to spend my life with the woman I love, got to raise 4 amazing children, got to build something lasting and meaningful. Not many men can say that, Molly. We were both lucky," Molly decided. "Lucky to find each other when we did. Lucky to have the courage to take a chance on each other. Lucky to have had all these years together." They finished preparing for bed and climbed under the familiar quilts, Molly curling naturally into Zachary's side as she had done for over 30 years. His arms came around her automatically, holding her close, and she listened to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "Forever and always, Zachary Harrison." "Forever and always, Molly Harrison," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for being my wife, for giving me a family, for building this life with me. You are everything good in my world." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had started as strangers brought together by desperate circumstances, and had become the love story neither of them had ever dared to dream they could have. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cold, stars blazing in the vast sky above the ranch they had built together, above the family they had created, above the legacy of love and commitment and choosing each other that would live on long after they were gone. The next morning dawned bright and clear, promising a beautiful late summer day. Molly woke to find Zachary already up and dressed, standing at the window looking out over the ranch with a contemplative expression on his face. She joined him, slipping her arm around his waist and leaning against his solid strength. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how I want to spend the rest of my days," Zachary replied. "However many or few that might be, I want to wake up next to you every morning, Molly." I want to sit on that porch and watch the sunset with you every evening. I want to watch our grandchildren grow up and maybe even see great-grandchildren. I want to keep building this life we started 32 years ago, keep adding to it, keep making it richer and fuller. Is that too much to ask?" "That is not too much to ask," Molly said, her throat tight with emotion. "That is exactly what I want too. More time with you, more years of this life we have built, more memories to add to all the ones we already have. I want it all, Zachary, every moment we can steal," and they got their wish. They had another 20 years together. Years filled with more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Years of watching their ranch continue to prosper and their family continue to grow. Years of simple pleasures like sitting on the porch together, reading to each other, taking slow walks around the property, and marveling at everything they had built together. When Zachary finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84, with Molly holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed, his last words were, "Thank you for being my wife." And Molly, through her tears, whispered back, "Thank you for being my husband, for being Samuel's father, for giving me this beautiful life." She lived another 5 years after that, kept going by the love of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, by the memories of over 50 years with the man who had saved her life and given her a reason to live. When she passed away at 87, surrounded by family in the home she and Zachary had built together, her last conscious thought was of that day in Helena when a cowboy had caught her on the street and changed the course of her entire life with one simple act of kindness. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with a simple stone that read, "Zachary and Molly Harrison, beloved parents and grandparents together forever." And on summer evenings, when the light was just right and the wind whispered through the grass on that hill, their descendants would swear they could feel the presence of that great love, that foundational love upon which the entire family had been built. Samuel, who lived to be 92 and saw 5 generations of his family, would tell the story over and over to anyone who would listen. The story of how his mother had been desperate and alone, how his father, the only father he had ever known or wanted to know, had stepped up and said, "I will be his father," and had kept that promise every day of his life. He told it as a love story, as an example of what real commitment and real love looked like, as proof that family was built not just by blood but by choice and dedication, and showing up day after day. The ranch continued on through the generations, growing and evolving, but never losing the foundation of love and hard work and integrity that Zachary and Molly had established. Children were born there, raised there, learned there what it meant to be part of a family that valued each other above all else. The story of Zachary and Molly became part of the family lore, told and retold, a reminder of where they all came from and what kind of love had made them possible. And somewhere in the Montana sky, in the vast expanse of stars above the ranch, there was a love story still echoing through time. The story of a woman who thought her life was over, and a man who offered her a second chance. The story of a cowboy who said, "I will be his father," and kept that promise with every beat of his heart. The story of 2 strangers who became lovers, partners, best friends, and soulmates, who built something lasting and beautiful from unpromising beginnings. It was a love story for the ages, born in the wild west of Montana territory, forged in hard work and commitment, and lasting far beyond the lifetimes of the 2 people who started it. It was proof that sometimes the greatest love stories do not start with love at first sight or fairy tale romance, but with simple kindness, with choosing to help when you do not have to, with seeing the person someone truly is beneath the circumstances that might obscure them from others. Zachary Harrison had caught Molly Richards when she fell, both literally and figuratively. And in doing so he had caught himself as well, finding the family and the love and the purpose he had been searching for without even knowing it. Together they had built not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love that would ripple through generations, reminding all who came after them that love is not just about passion or romance, but about showing up, about choosing each other, about keeping promises even when they are hard. And in the end, that was the greatest gift they gave to their descendants. Not the ranch or the land or the material things they left behind, but the example of what real love looked like, lived out day after day for over 50 years. The example of a man who chose to be a father to a child who was not biologically his and loved that child with his whole heart. The example of a woman who took a chance on a stranger and built a life with him that exceeded her wildest dreams. The example of two people who faced whatever life threw at them together, hand in hand, hearts united, until death finally parted them. It was a love story that began with "I will be his father" and ended with "together forever." And everything in between was a testament to the power of love, the strength of commitment, and the beauty of choosing each other every single day. It was the kind of love story that people told their children and grandchildren, that inspired hope in those who heard it, that reminded everyone who encountered it that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories come from the most ordinary beginnings, and that the truest love is not the love that happens to you, but the love you choose to build day by day, moment by moment, with someone who chooses to build it right back with you.